Welcome back to the podcast from Responsible Raw Materials, where we explore the people and perspectives shaping what responsible raw materials really look like in practice. Today's episode is really about how courage and the fire in someone's belly can drive lasting change and innovation throughout a profession. I'm joined by the wonderful Anne Thompson, a geologist, entrepreneur, educator, communicator, and somebody who has spent decades helping shape conversations across the economic geology community. What I loved about this conversation is that Anne's career is full of moments where she could have stayed comfortably on a familiar path, but instead she chose to follow what genuinely interested her, even when that path was unconventional, uncertain, or occasionally a little daunting. It starts with a childhood spent camping across North America, collecting rocks with her father, before leading her into geology, mineral exploration, consulting, and a whole host of other areas. Along the way, she's built a consulting business, contributed to industry reference work, helped advance the use of spectral technologies, worked across multiple continents, and become increasingly involved in questions around communication, education, and the future of her profession. But what makes Anne's story particularly interesting is that she's never been comfortable accepting simple narratives. Early in her career, she found herself balancing a strong environmental outlook with a growing fascination for mineral exploration. Rather than choosing a side, she went looking for answers herself. That willingness to see things firsthand, form her own views, and keep questioning accepted wisdom runs throughout this conversation. We talk about working as one of the few women in exploration in geology in the 1980s, building a career alongside a fellow geologist who also happened to become her partner for life, navigating major industry events such as Bre-X, and continually finding new ways to contribute to her profession. We also discuss leadership, communication, education, inclusion, and why Anne believes we need to rethink how we train the next generation of geoscientists. And finally, we look ahead. How can the resources sector better serve society? What role should communities play in resource development? And how do we create systems that are more adaptive, more inclusive, and ultimately more resilient? It's a conversation about geology, certainly, but it's also a conversation about courage, reinvention, and the value of being willing to think for yourself. I hope you enjoy it.
I am here with the one and only Anne Thompson. But just to start us off, Anne, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are?
I am. Ooh, that's such a big question. It's impossible. Totally impossible. I recently described myself as a snake that sheds its skin regularly, which means that there's a career of perseverance, adjustment, and shedding. So I am. Uh, phew. I am a geologist in how I see the world and a geologist in how I'm trained that has migrated through a variety of different career stages from exploration field geology in Australia and the Southwest Pacific to running an applied mineralogy consulting company for many years to becoming more interested in communication and geoscience communication and broadly how do we make the best economic geologists for the whole world and society. So I think that sums it up.
I think that is a great summary. So, well, let's start at the beginning. So you start off by saying, right, I'm a geologist to start with. So why are you a geologist? Where did it all begin?
I didn't know until I was in university that it started when I was young. I had a father who moved from electrical engineering into teaching natural science. And we went on many, many camping trips around North America for weeks on end. And he always had a hammer under the front seat, as well as guides to where to find the agates or outcrops we stopped at. And that was just normal. We just did that. Then I got to university, took an elective course, and the university I'd chosen was a city location, which was a mistake. That was not my space. And the elective was geology, actually geochemical cycles of the earth, taught by Heinrich Holland, of all people. And he took us on a field trip. And that was that, because we got out of the city.
So you got to get out the city, see some rocks, and was that something that you just tried to manifest, I guess, in your life ever since, being able to get outside and go exploring?
Well, I was driven by a very strong to almost radical environmental streak. So we're talking late 70s. There was big concerns around nuclear power. There was big concerns around many things in terms of environment. And so I led an environmental action organization. I did not quite protest the nuclear power plants, but I trained in civil disobedience. And then and I worked in radioactive waste disposal for a couple of years. And then, I don't know, I knew from university that I had liked sulfides. And I had this piece of Balmat sphalerite that I loved. And I had an opportunity to work in exploration for a summer in Colorado. It's like, okay, why not? And I also was given a huge opportunity by Steve Scott, the University of Toronto, to work with him because of some things I'd done as an undergraduate. And it was just like, I like sulfides. I like sphalerite. It's cool. And so that's what I went off and did. But at the same time, I had to balance where I was with my environmental thinking. And at the time, there was a big issue around Crested Butte in Colorado. And so I took myself, drove my truck from my summer work and exploration into Crested Butte to see what the deal was. So that would have been 1981. And I looked at the hills that they were all worried about a mine being at, an underground mine, mind you, the head frame. And I looked over at those hills and they were covered in ski condos. And in that moment, the penny dropped. It's like, the mine isn't the problem. The people on their chrome moly reinforced 10 speeds are the problem.
So that's pretty unusual in that you went, okay, hang on, I'm conflicted here. So I'm geekily interested in sulfides, but I've got this kind of core of really strong beliefs on the environmental side of things. And I guess the unusual thing here is you actually went and looked.
Yeah.
You went and
Yeah.
did the research.
I did. And I found a lot of very comfortable professional people who felt uncomfortable having miners and working class people in their town. And that hit me to the core. I had worked, because I'd been working in radioactive waste disposal, I had worked on the Nevada test site and actually in an underground facility with drillers. So I'd had an early experience working with, and they were, salt of the earth. And so that was kind of where, and then a realization, even at that point, I was already engaged in thinking about solar power, wind power, alternative energy generation, because we knew about climate change then, and I was taught in classes. And it was like, this all needs stuff as well. And so, yeah, I'm going to eventually, my dream at that time was I'm going to eventually bring these two communities so they can talk to each other. I haven't quite done that.
We might come back to that. So I guess there's this huge independent thought, and not saying, well, somebody else has said this, I will just believe them and follow along, but also as well courage to almost challenge that conventional thought as well. So okay, so we've gone, right, I really like sulfides, but I'm doing all this other stuff as well. What happened next?
So I was, as I said, fortunate to get a position at the University of Toronto to do a master's degree. The project was extremely fundamental science, and the experimental method was undoubtedly flawed, which I told my supervisor at the time. And I was faced with a decision of do 2 years of work, which I thought would not be useful, or give up having a master's. And I chose to stick and do the work. And so I was looking at diffusion of iron and zinc in sphalerite. I was sticking sphalerite cubes together and sticking them in high pressure chambers and looking at, anyway, they would stay there for 6 weeks at a time. Then I'd pull them apart and try to analyze how far the zinc and the iron diffused, and did calculus, which I hate. So that was great. I got 6 or 7 maybe viable data points, which maybe meant not much, and I graduated. Yeah. At the same time, I did, in fact, acquire quite a strong partner for life. So that was the bonus of the University of Toronto section. It was quite early in life, and to get that partner then, I'm pretty darn lucky.
Okay, so did you meet John, your partner, before or after you realized that the experiment, etc., was fundamentally flawed?
It was all happening at the same time. It was pretty traumatic.
Yeah.
Like leave this option, leave that option. What do I do? And I think he actually probably counseled me to just, let's just do it. Yeah. But
So I guess with hindsight, it might have been painful, but perhaps, it was worth dealing with for a few years.
I think the moral of the story is it doesn't really matter what you do in graduate school. And I think you could tell that story too. I mean, there's things I learned, so many things I learned. And I had these amazing graduate courses, the mineral deposits courses with Tony Naldrit and Steve Scott and Ed Spooner. And so we were so lucky to be in that environment, learning about so much, and then field trips. And so all of that part totally counteracted the months of sticking cubes together.
So so you've acquired your partner for life. That sounds very transactional, doesn't it?
Well, it's true.
And you've managed to get through 2 years of that master's. What happens next?
Well, because he was in Australia and went in Australia for a year before we had a courtship that we would never recommend anybody else to have, which was basically very fast and furious for about 5 months. He went to Australia. We had a year apart. We got married. And that's not necessarily the recommended path. It ended up working. And I really wanted to go to Australia. I mean, geez, what's not to like? I mean, this guy has British passport, Canadian passport, and Australian residency visa. Like, and I can bring the American passport. Like, let's go. We can do anything, right? That's the funny part of the story. But yeah, we just went to Australia. And then I had to finish my master's. I typed it. I'm one of the last people to type a thesis on an electric typewriter in a caravan in Teutonic Bore, north of Kalgoorlie, 3 hours north of Western Australia, with my pet spider that I fed blowflies to, and then finished. And at the same time, had been talking to the company John was working for as the wife. I mean, I was always at the dinner. I was always the spouse. I went to the toy library things with all the women. I did all of that, but I also doing my thing. So I went and looking for a job, and they did. Having said for months they wouldn't give me one, they did. So then, yeah, I did that. I became an exploration field geologist. Yeah.
And how was that? I guess having sort of been the wife or still being the wife, but now actually being one of the working team. How did people view you then?
I don't think they ever knew quite how to view me. But that's the story of my life, because it's with a partner in the business, you end up playing both sides. You end up just socializing with the partners, and more that's with the men as well, which is great. You socialize with the partners, but then you're also, wanting to be over there with, back then, the guys
Mm.
talking about the rocks and what we were doing. Yeah.
And the really cool sulfites, as we've already established. So now you're in the field, you're doing exploration. What was that like?
Um, it was great. I loved working in Australia. The first 2 weeks was challenging because they, in their wisdom at the time, sent me out by myself in a ute that was not, had no filter on the fuel. And they sent me driving 600 kilometers across the outback on dirt roads to another town to do this property review. And of course, my ute broke down halfway, and they'd sent me without training in radio or knowing what the call sign was. So that was entertaining. But having limped through that experience, I then went on to really enjoy working in Australia, and had the greatest experience with the drillers, with the projects, with my manager. And John and I worked out at the same office for 3 years, and it worked really well. The only problem was they didn't really understand that I was a woman. Because I had that conversation at one point with my manager who was hiring people, and I said, but you don't have any women on the list to interview. And I said, well, they have to change tires on trucks, and they have to do this and that and the other thing. And I said, but I do all that. And he said, oh, but you're Anne.
So how did that make you feel?
Frustrated, determined. Like, yeah, not going to quit. No, those sorts of things. But it's common. I mean, I think it happens across the whole in other industries as well. And it's good. You get to be seen as the person you are and what you are capable of, and not as your gender. So I think that's quite a good thing.
Mm.
But the fact that my abilities or what I'd been doing didn't translate to support somebody else, that's like, oh, geez, this is going to be a hard slog.
So you love the sulfides,
I
and
still
you're
do.
Anne,
I
and you're
still do.
Anne. So, and you've done 3 years in the field, etc., in Australia. What
Correct.
comes next?
Well, my partner, who's very good and was 4 years more advanced and had a PhD, got an offer to move with our company, BP International, to England. And his family was there, and we had debates. And at the same time, we were debating academic careers for him and all sorts of things. And we took the option of going to the UK. In my naivete, I never even really asked about me, which was kind of looking back on it. If it was me now, no, that wouldn't have happened. But it worked out in the end, and that's when I started consulting. And I realized that John was going to be working from the UK 8, 9 months of the year on the road, and I was not going to sit in a cottage having a lovely time and drinking tea and making my curtains, which I did. So I just basically got on a plane back to Australia and found contract jobs.
Which is an incredibly brave thing to do.
I don't even remember how I did it, but I guess I might have written to somebody at ahead, but I do remember being in Sydney and walking into offices and talking to people. And yes, I mean, people hired me. John Dow hired me, years ago, and it was amazing. Yeah, and things did work out, and BP did as well. And that the work we did in Indonesia and Papua New Guinea was phenomenal. So yes, it worked. But then the next step.
Just before we get into the next step, so this is something where we've already established the fact that it was quite unusual as a woman working in exploration, and they said, "Oh no, but you're Anne." But now you rock up in offices of people who don't necessarily know you're Anne. Did you? How was it being a woman, or did it not actually matter?
I I think in most of what happened, it didn't matter. It briefly mattered with BP. There was a brief conversation about how I couldn't work in most places in the world because I might be, raped or assaulted or something. But we got past that. Again, they needed my something I had. Yes,
Mhm.
yes, and I knew a bit about epithermal deposits, and John was there, and so yeah, that worked. Um, yeah.
Okay, so you said that you've built us up. Something happened next. What happened next, Anne?
Hormones. Yeah, I got to 30 and like the desire to have a child was pretty strong, and another opportunity came up for John to move to the US and to Salt Lake City, where he would not be on a plane all the time doing global area selection, whatever. And that was and I'm from the States, and like, okay, let's go to Salt Lake City, and the West is wonderful.
And I guess you'd already done a stint in his home in the UK.
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
So it's only fair.
There's too much fog in the UK. We were no way we were going to stay. Too many people popping out from behind the hedges. It just didn't suit either of us, really. So yeah, we get to Salt Lake City, bit of culture shock, and of course me, who actually is already pregnant when we move, because shockingly it happened very quickly. And but of course I hadn't stopped. So I interviewed for a couple exploration jobs, like 6 months pregnant. I don't know why Sarco didn't want to hire me then. and and then I found a research grant opportunity with the Utah Geological Survey, which was phenomenal. It was all of $7,500 US. But with it, I mapped alunite in southern Utah and started, and I had through SEG field trips, through contact company field trip with Dick Silito and Hal Bonham in Nevada. I had acquired some interest and expertise around lithocaps and epithermal deposits and all of that. And we knew that there was a lot of work that needed to be done in alunite, and Utah is phenomenal So that was what I did. I basically went off, not quite a second master's, but I just that was what I did. And I had bought my truck and took my 1-year-old, well, 3-month to 1-year-old daughter in the field with me, and sort of interesting, yeah, adventures.
Well, I don't know. As the little person being the field assistant, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, she's now a geomicrobiologist. Just saying, you throw enough rocks at a kid, they stick. Yeah, so that was, and I published a couple papers, which actually Stephanie Mills at the Utah Geological Survey found, and they recently republished and cleaned up, and they wrote a little piece, so it was quite nice. Yeah. So, and then,
Yeah.
and then, well, how long can you be in Utah? And there was really a pull to do something, and my partner has great capability, and the idea of being in academia had always had a bit of a pull. So the option came up to move to Vancouver to take on the director of MDRU. So, and honestly, we had always, and Canada was a good place for us. So we met in Canada. Canada has that kind of cross-cultural UK, US feeling. And so that was another big decision. So yes, with a 2-year-old daughter, we moved to Vancouver.
So your partner's now into academia.
Yes.
You've just done a load of academic work.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah.
So you're now in Vancouver.
But now in Vancouver, I have to reinvent myself again.
But you're Anne.
But I have to reinvent myself. And I realize with a 2-year-old that the field work and the field options and traveling really isn't all that feasible. And I don't know, I guess out of wanting to do something, I started doing some photography, and I started doing some consulting reports for people. And somewhere in that period in the mid-90s, I started Petroscience Consultants. And so we did, the vision was to do alteration studies for exploration and mining because people didn't know how to study alteration. Around the same time, Dick Henley was at our house for dinner, and we were talking about alteration and studying alteration. And he's like, well, and the Atlas idea came up, and it's like, why don't you just do it? And so then we put together the Atlas of Alteration, and all volunteer work. And I think there were 5 babies born during that book between the women who were involved in the production. We almost put all their photos in the back. But anyway, that's an aside. So yeah, so that all started, that kind of consolidated what I was doing in terms of applied mineralogy and using all the tools that were available. And at the same time in that period, I encountered Phoebe Hoff and the PIMA, and we collaborated very well together to really build the case study for doing spectroscopy in the field.
And is that something, I mean, have you seen all of that? You put together a lot of the foundational aspects so that lots of other people can use it around the world. How have you seen that develop over time?
Well, I mean, there's been some places where I wish that the knowledge transfer had worked a bit better. Where I've saw companies start up and not start with the knowledge that I had and kind of repeat mistakes, which was frustrating to watch. But I think that, yeah, largely it's gone well, but we're still not quite past on the academic side. We're still not quite past this. Well, we'll have that analysis with the spectroscopy, but then we'll also have XRD and probe and all these other things. And I'm shaking my head to say we are so far past that. We need to use the data in different and more robust and much more density of data. But it's good. Yeah.
And I guess, I mean, with all of this, there's been that sort of not straddling, but being comfortable in a number of different spaces. So you've got the academic aspects and being able to almost have that empathy and see behind the scenes in terms of what's going on from a research kind of mental space, but then also working, I suspect, with many different companies who have perhaps different desires, aims, objectives.
That's a lead in if ever there was. So yes, and in fact, in the mid-90s, I recently did a graph of my career, and of course in that period through those 30s, there was an awful lot of late 20s to 30s, there was a lot of change. So there's a lot of little bumps because a lot of things were going on. So at the same time as the Atlas basically getting finished, I also sold a PIMA to Bre-X. And this was in a period when I was fronting the PIMA in the booth at PDAC. And so we sold this PIMA to Bre-X. In fact, they ended up buying 2 in the end. Phoebe couldn't go to train them. They also wanted a whole lot of other work done and the kind of skills I had in petrography and SEM and whatever else. So yes, I worked for Bre-X for over a year and actually visited site and was party to, knowing all of them. And that's a whole nother podcast. but a hugely destructive point in my career. Yet another time I could have just said, no, I'm not doing this anymore.
So I think that for anybody listening, are you comfortable giving a very succinct, why is Bre-X so famous?
Well, there was a huge fraud, still really probably the biggest one. And the crew involved and the people that I actually worked with while I was on site were moving samples off site and salting them with gold. And that, drove the share price up to astronomical, stratospheric levels. And then as companies started to come in and do their due diligence to kind of take on the project, and, finally, like the 3rd or 4th round of that, I believe it was Freeport, kind of said, hey, there's nothing in this twinned hole. And then the whole thing started to unravel. Within a very short period of time, I think everybody knew that it was, and the stock crashed to essentially nothing. And so that really took the whole, it hit the whole industry, hit the whole gold industry. People were out of jobs in other companies. I mean, the gold, everything just fell apart with that event. It wasn't just an impact on the investors or the people who may have lost money, but it was just the whole industry got hit. I mean, I know people who were working in gold, and all of a sudden is like, I've got no job, and actually went off and found mines in in Zambia, but anyway, or DRC. But it was a massive blip in our time. And then, of course, subsequent to that, for me, I had nowhere to report any concerns I had. I was a consultant. I had all of, the confidentiality kind of concerns. I couldn't tell people what I was seeing or felt. And so subsequent to that is really why we brought in the resource codes and the 43101. And the 43101 is really just about reporting your information. It doesn't mean that you're reporting that you have a good deposit. It just means that you are transparent and reporting in a clear and accurate way what you've done. And if we'd had that for Bre-X, I don't think it would have happened in the way that it did.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that was truly horrific, and I think probably still fairly emotional for a lot of people. But looking at the silver lining, I guess, with regards to it, is it did give the entire industry like a right old kick to say, no, we need to be able to trust one another.
Yeah.
And create that transparency and actually be able to communicate uncertainty or confidence in what actually might be in the ground.
Yeah. And unintended consequence was it actually started to create a bit of a database of information on mineral deposits, which people use, and we can use more and more with our new tools. Yeah.
So I'm liking that we're shedding skins here. So we're going back to the initial metaphor. So with Bre-X behind us.
Yes.
We're still in Vancouver, though.
Still in Vancouver. Yeah. In that period, we've actually, at that point when I was working for Bre-X, we'd already had our twins, so they were 2 years old when I went off to Indonesia, and so the next 10 years is a bit of a blur. Twins is a blur, and keeping my business going was a blur. But so I just kept doing that and doing the spectral work, and had 3 or 4 people working with me. That was really great. Come late 2007, I'm feeling like things aren't that great. I feel like the canary in the coal mine. Not so many samples coming through my way, not so many good projects, and decided to mothball petroscience as it was. And I also got to the point where I never really did like petrography. People might be shocked to hear that, but that's a true, honest admission. I did like alteration, and I liked understanding the rocks, and I was willing to do stuff I didn't like in order to understand the rocks. But I got to the point where I really didn't is it 3% titanite? Is it 5%? What's in? You know what? Probably doesn't matter, and I don't really care. So I was like, that's not me.
Mm.
I've always had the reputation for doing quality work. So no, that's not me. So I sold my Pima, sold my microscope. Sadly, I shouldn't have done that. But anyway, and moved on. Yeah.
So what did you do next?
So there was a quiet period after that. I felt like not part of the industry for quite a while. I really distanced myself from the Society of Economic Geologists as well. I didn't feel like I had a part in any of that stuff. But I went to I think one of the important things I did was I went to the SEG meeting in Tasmania, in Hobart in 2015. And, went along because I'm still really an economic geologist. There's no there's no denying that, right? I'd done a few years of community planning and building sports fields and, fundraising and whatever, but I'm really an economic geologist. And a couple of, amongst other things, the science was good. We taught an alteration short course, which had gotten me back into looking at the rocks again. And doing that course with John was really, inspiring and great, and shipping rocks all around the world. That was fun. And then a couple of women also spoke to me, one of whom's here at the conference. And the kinds of questions they had and some of the concerns they had were ones that I had dealt with 20 years before. And I got mad and decided to reinsert myself in ways that I could. Yeah. And then with as time went, and another couple of years later, Francois convinced me to be on the council of SEG, which was a big, I thought, no. And then I thought, for all those reasons, yes, I need to do this. I need to go in and just be me. I don't care anymore what people think. I'm just going to speak my mind, which is a nice place to be in life, actually. And then as subsequent to that, doing the council, I also, during the pandemic, took a public civic dialogue and public engagement 9-month course, which was phenomenal. So learned quite a bit more, and then started hosting a podcast. And I would love to have you on my podcast.
Yeah, give us an advert. Go on.
This is Discovery to Recovery, where we tell you stories from the world of ore deposits. Yeah.
I'd be delighted to. Absolutely, absolutely. Just in terms of that public engagement, etc., course that you did. So you run the podcast. How else do you use that learning that you acquired?
I've used it mostly in the realm of the Society of Economic Geologists in terms of facilitation, getting people to work together, thinking about what we're doing next. Right now, helping to facilitate a massive governance change for the organization. So that's pretty huge. And I have done some other things as well along the line, and also very much in the inclusion space, or the accessibility and welcoming environment, and what kinds of things we can do around that, and getting people to talk to each other in open ways. Yeah.
So I'm getting the hint that maybe one way to get Anne to do something is to really, really annoy you. So what's annoying you at the moment?
Oh, well, there are still things. I don't think I'm annoyed so much as I see things I feel like we should be doing as a science, as training our next generation. I hear the kind of ways people talk about training the next generation. I think we're just missing the point.
Mhm.
And so if I could influence that, and in little ways, I'm trying to do that again through SEG, with looking at different ways of providing knowledge. But yeah, we get so stuck in look at the rock, teach the person how to look at a rock. Well, yes, absolutely, but maybe you do it in a different way than how we've done it before, and maybe we make it much more current and exciting, and ignite the curiosity in our current students where they're at, not where we think we were 40 years ago.
Mm. I think, yeah, I mean, it's a field where there is huge respect for the discoveries and the understanding of what's come before us, but the context of the world is very different today in 2026 compared to actually not even that many years ago.
Yeah.
And being able to be curious and innovative and creative about, well, no, hang on a second, where are we going next is so
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. And that takes some thinking and going back to, really thinking, well, maybe within a box, but just slightly outside of a box with some constraints. There are constraints on us, but how do we think about it? And how do we, the whole university model needs to be upended for starters, but maybe we can't quite do that. But from professional societies, I think can do quite a lot to poke from the sides and to do things in different ways. And that's the only place that I can see right now that I can influence. So that's where I'm going.
Brilliant. So just to finish off then, with regards to raw materials, we know that the world needs raw materials, but we all know that maybe there are different ways of making sure we have access to them.
Right.
What kind of changes would you like to see coming through over the next few years or the next few decades in terms of making sure that people around the world have access to what they need?
I do. We absolutely have to think hard about different business models. And we have to disrupt. And I'm totally in that camp of yeah, go modular, go adaptive, community ownership, real, true partnerships with communities where they're engaged in running small operations. Do we still need the big, humongous mines? Yes, that's not going to go away. But there is a whole other avenue that really could bring benefit to people all around the world. And remembering that it's not just about, obviously it's not about our phones, it's not about technology or even data centers. It's about where we can deliver power to so people can cook without using fires. It's about water, and water is like one of the most critical things that we could probably all be engaged in thinking, even with our raw materials, about what can we do to help.
Brilliant words to finish on. Thank you so, so much for taking the time. Thank you very, very much, and good luck with the next challenge.
Thank you for taking through some of my skin shedding events. No, marvelous. Thanks, Sarah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Anne.
So that was my conversation with Anne. And what stayed with me most is the combination of courage, reinvention, and a real determination to leave things a little better than she found them. One of the things I admire most about Anne is that she's never seemed content to simply follow the path that was already there. Whether it was questioning the relationship between mining and the environment, building her own consulting business, embracing new technologies, or becoming increasingly involved in education, communication, and professional leadership, she has consistently chosen to explore ideas that genuinely interested her, even when they weren't necessarily the obvious choice. And I think that's quite a rare quality. Throughout the conversation, Anne describes herself as someone who regularly sheds her skin. I love that description because it perfectly captures a career that has continually evolved without ever losing sight of the values that underpin it. Each new chapter seems to have built naturally on the last. Exploration becoming applied mineralogy, then becoming consulting, communication, and then into leadership. Not because Anne set out with a grand master plan, but because she kept following the questions that she felt were worth asking. Another thing that really resonated with me is Anne's willingness to look beyond the simple narratives. As a young geologist with strong environmental convictions, she could quite easily have concluded that mining wasn't for her. Instead, she went to see things for herself. That decision seems to have shaped the rest of her career. Again and again, she chose to understand first and form an opinion second. I think that's something all of us could probably do a little more often. We also talked about education, professional societies, and how we prepare the next generation of geoscientists. One of the things that came through strongly is that Anne isn't interested in preserving the profession exactly as it is today. She's interested in helping it evolve, helping it become more welcoming, more collaborative, more relevant, and better equipped for the challenges that lie ahead. Because the future of raw materials won't just depend on better technology, it will depend on better conversations, on bringing together different disciplines, different experiences, and different perspectives to solve increasingly complex problems. And perhaps that's why Anne has had such an influence over so many years, not because she's always had the answers, but because she's never stopped asking thoughtful questions. Looking back across her career, I think what really stands out is that combination of courage and curiosity, that willingness to step into uncertainty, trust your instincts, and follow the fire in your belly, even when you don't know exactly where it will lead. For me, that's what this conversation is really about. Not simply building a career, but building a career with purpose, one that's prepared to evolve, to challenge assumptions, and ultimately to leave the profession stronger than you found it. And speaking of people who have shared that journey, in our next episode we'll be joined by somebody whose name has appeared more than once through today's discussion. Anne's husband, fellow geologist and longtime partner in both life and many professional adventures, John. I'm really looking forward to hearing his perspective on some of the stories that Anne has shared today, exploring his own remarkable career and discovering where their journeys have run in parallel and where they've taken very different paths. And that, ultimately, is what Responsible Raw Materials is all about. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode. Responsible Raw Materials brings together voices from across industry, academia, government, civil society, and beyond to explore shared challenges and opportunities regarding those raw materials we so often need at the beginning of our supply chains. If you enjoyed this conversation with Anne and would like to hear more, please feel free to go to www.responsiblerawmaterials.com to hear and see more of her thoughts shared through our annual and free-to-access global conferences.